What's up, everybody? I'm Sam from Flywheel, and this is like a summary supplemental to the most recent interview that we had with Chunda from Ion Protocol. And I wanted to make this supplemental because the stuff that we're dealing with here is on the infrastructure side. There's some kind of difficult aspects to it that are a little hard to understand, and I want to break them down for you. So in this first part, he's going to be talking about the two functions that Ion is going to be doing, and he calls it the primitive and the product. And the primitive is going to be this risk analysis that they're running on ETH validators, and the product is going to be the lending market. So let's see what he has to say there.
Ion effectively, I like to split it up into two things. There's the primitive side of it, and then there's the product. So the primitive, Ion is focused on building a scalable platform to underwrite validator-backed assets.
Okay, so what Chunda is talking about here is essentially saying that they want to build a lending platform that can provide loans against validator-backed assets. In this case, it's Ethereum. So everything is ETH here. Staked ETH, restaking ETH, LSDs, it's all ETH. And they're going to build a lending market for ETH. And so he's going to talk about the issues with like the regular lending markets that we have right now, which would be like Maker and Compound. So let's take a look at that.
So traditionally in DeFi, we are mostly familiar with lending protocols, Makers, obvious Compounds. And all of those kind of products are all the collateral types and how we determine things like LTV and interest rate curves and the kink and utilization rates and optimal utilization, so on and so forth. It's all on the basis of the depth of secondary market liquidity and pricing and price stability, to be specific. And when you look at validator-backed assets, whether they're LSTs or restaking positions, the idea of the redeemability of these assets and like the creditworthiness is a lot less a function of the depth of the secondary market liquidity post withdrawals. And it's more about, can I redeem the constituent value of this asset into the beacon chain for what it's worth?
Okay, so what Chunda is saying is that for Maker and Compound, there's always going to be a price oracle, typically like a Chainlink oracle, that has a bunch of different entities that are feeding in different prices into Chainlink. And then Chainlink essentially pops out on the other side a price for like STETH, or it's a price for FrxETH or stake FrxETH or RETH. It really could be anything. The main thing is that all liquidations that take place on Maker or Compound or Fraxlin are facilitated through these application layer price oracles, where the price of the on-chain asset determines how it's being liquidated inside of the DeFi app in these DeFi lending markets. And so what they're trying to do is a little bit different. So what they're looking at is saying that we're going to lend against the balances of the beacon chain, because we can query the beacon chain and we know exactly how much ETH is in these different LSDs. We can see every single ETH that's staked to every single validator, and we can calculate that all together, and then we can put it through our little risk engine, and we can pop something out that provides us to tell us how much max LTV we can provide and what the interest rate setups should be. And that's mainly what they're getting at, is that like instead of having a pricing oracle, they're going to have an oracle which is based on the consensus layer. And it might seem small, but it's actually a pretty big difference, because what they're saying is that the on-chain prices don't really matter. Like you could flash loan FrxETH or like STETH or something. You could flash loan them or drive the prices down, maybe depeg the prices from something, from the price of ETH, right? But those LSDs are always redeemable for the ETH price. So they're going to lend against the ETH that's on the beacon chain, and they're not going to lend against any on-chain pricing. And so he's going to talk about in this next clip about what their actual product is that they're going to be using their risk engine to build.
What we wanted to do was essentially build like a trustless data pipeline end to end, where we are able to read validator specific information, and we plug that into a ZKML or zero knowledge machine learning framework, where we actually analyze and effectively formulate credit risk profiles for different validators and groups of validators. And that's where the product side of Ion comes in. And the product side of Ion is we build financial primitives that are on the basis of this credit risk analysis. What a kind of beachhead first product that's coming out soon is going to be a lending market where all of this traditional parameterization is instead of being price oriented is actually replaced with this validator based credit risk analysis. And what this does for users is allow us to more capitally efficient underwrite those positions with ideally more minimal liquidation risk and being able to support a larger swath of assets, which ideally can be scalable to support restaking platforms and restaking positions, which most likely will not have robust counterparty liquidity for a long time.
Okay, so I find this last part really interesting where he's talking about all the different variants of LSDs and restaking and literally we're going to have thousands of different types of tokens which have different conditions that they're being created on. Like you'll have your kind of base layer, which will be the LSDs, right? Which is stake FrxETH, you have FrxETH, RETH, and then you're going to deposit those tokens into something like EigenLayer, who we've introduced before. And then EigenLayer is going to be adding on all these different slashing conditions into those LSDs, which changes the risk profile of the LSDs themselves. And so you may not want to like lend so heavily against certain restaking tokens because of the risk that they're taking. But it doesn't mean that the collateral's any worse than what, say, stake FrxETH has, right? There's just maybe potentially more risks that you want to like lower the max LTV. So say you have like stake FrxETH, you deposit into EigenLayer, and then you put a bunch of new slashing conditions on top, right? Each of those slashing conditions now increases the potential risk for being slashed of that LSD token. And so maybe now instead of lending at like 95% LTV, maybe you bring it down to like 70%, depending on each individual specific condition that you have. And so this is really the crux of what Chunda is trying to say. Okay, so what exactly are they looking at? In this next part, Chunda is going to talk about the individual data points that they do want to look at. Some of these have yet to be implemented, like the ones towards the later end, talking about the actual setups. But the first part, the actual consensus chain information, should be verifiable pretty readily. So let's take a look at it.
So there's kind of two sections of different data points that we aggregate. So one is consensus layer information, where we pull things like attestation history, inclusion delay over time, what's your like average reward, what's like the penalties that you've ever incurred in the past. We aggregate all that information for all the validators in a given entity. And then we also take in information about validator setups. What client are you running? What's your execution client? What's your consensus client? Are you running a DVT setup? Which provider are you using? Who are you splitting your keys to? Are you running in a trusted execution environment? Which trusted execution environment? What is the software running the trusted execution environment? Effectively, we analyze all the disparate kind of different setups that people have and then create a composite score that's kind of an aggregation of the probabilistic nature of any one of those validators get slashed in that entire entity.
Okay, so they get all this information from the consensus chain, and they're also going to get stuff from validator setups. But the next thing that they have to do is they actually have to prove it. So in this next clip, Chunda is going to talk about how they're actually going to use their ZK proofs to verify the consensus layer.
So what can we verify? Any consensus layer derived data, most of it is pretty easy to verify on an irregular basis. Now, doing it on a slot by slot basis and aggregating that many proofs gets really expensive really quickly. Doing it for 700,000 validators once a while, whether that's a day or a week, is relatively manageable pricing wise and speed wise. A lot of consensus layer information is pretty easily verifiable. After EIP 4788 as well, where we're able to effectively query the beacon block root in the EVM, it'll allow pretty much anyone to cross-reference and verify information.
Okay, now Chunda is going to talk about the second part of the verification, which is going to be the validator setups themselves, which is a little bit harder. It requires the validators to actually attest to the setups that they have, but a couple of projects are working on this right now. You're going to hear a clip about Puffer Finance, and then you're also going to hear one about Obel as well too.
We love the Puffer people, and they're working on this as well. Is finding ways to verify. They have this thing called RAVE. It's called Remote Attestation Verification. Effectively, what you can do is they have a setup where you can actually remotely attest on chain to the fact that you're using their trusted setups. And this essentially not necessarily fully solves the problem for just execution environments because there's a lot of different types you can use. But this kind of open source software is a great starting point for building like trustless ways to verify these types of validator setup informations.
So what's the point of all of this? Well, it's to be able to handle liquidations. By having the consensus layer data plus the data that they get from the validators, they can now build this risk engine where they plug everything in and they can determine two things, and that's max LTV, and then they can also determine the interest rate, the curve, and everything that goes into there. Because what's happening is that they're going to be lending ETH against ETH that's on the beacon chain. And so the only time that liquidations actually have to occur is when the beacon chain is getting slashed. And Chunda is going to talk about that right here now.
When we initiate liquidations, it's off the basis of the amount of liquidity in a validator on the consensus layer. And it actually has nothing to do with the liquidity on the execution layer or like in an AMM or anything. So that means zero exposure to price manipulation in secondary markets causing liquidation. And so what we use is we use zero knowledge state proofs to verify the balance of the validators of your asset. And we only liquidate your position if that balance shifts below, the ideal LTV of that market. And so you never get exposure to price-based liquidations on the execution layer.
Okay, so why this is really important is because we're going to have a bunch of diversity in LSDs coming soon. There's already a long tail of LSD assets outside the top 3 on chain right now for FrxETH, FrxETH, and FrxETH. There's a bunch of competitors who may want to try like different things. And there's also going to be all this restaking conditions, slashing conditions that need to be taken into account. But everything's based on ETH. It's just ETH on the beacon chain that's earning yield. And so by making the liquidation engine based on solely just the beacon chain, now you can do a bunch of crazy stuff. Because let me talk about oracles for a second. Frax has gone through issues with oracles. It took us a long time to get a Chainlink oracle just for FrxETH. It took months. Sam K actually had to come out and make his case inside of, not even make a case, just kind of lament about the slow process of what Chainlink was doing inside of Telegram chat. And then magically a couple of days later, the oracle just appeared for FrxETH. And Chainlink is a little bit slow. They're quite big. They have a ton of different customers, and literally everybody wants to get a Chainlink oracle because you cannot have DeFi integrations without a Chainlink oracle. Like, there are other oracles that you can use, but no DeFi project is going to use them because it's not Chainlink. There's just a level of security that's assumed when you have a Chainlink oracle that a DeFi project is just going to immediately say yes. Sure, you have a Chainlink oracle, okay, we can integrate you. If you're a smaller project or one of these restaking tokens that are coming soon, you're never going to have a Chainlink oracle. It's too small of a market to really justify all the work that has to go into setting up that price feed. So with Ion, you don't have to worry about price feeds. All you have to do is to be able to query the on-chain balances for the ETH that's on the beacon chain and say like, oh yeah, hey, yes, the ETH is there, or no, it's being slashed. And then from that, you can make an oracle, which then feeds in information to the execution layer. It's very cool for lending because now like any ETH-based LSD, whether small or big or restaking, anything can now have a lending market for it, which is kind of a game changer. Okay, so I hope that kind of clears up a lot of the interview. Probably should go back and take another listen. Ion actually looks pretty interesting. At first, when I listened to this, I had to go read the docs, and I was a little confused. But I hope that the information here clears everything up. If you want to subscribe for more, make sure to subscribe here on YouTube. Also, you can go to flywheeldefi.com. Follow us on Twitter at the same name. You can find me on Twitter. I'm Sam at Traders Insight. And we're out. Peace.